And we are live! Welcome to Life Action Roleplay with
Kai Norman.
and Ryan Omega. We send our love to Cynthia Marie, who cannot join us tonight. Joining us for tonight's episode, if you can introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Anthea Tuley.
Yes. So, how would people know you, and what are your pronouns?
My pronouns are she, her. I do respond to they, them as well. You may know me. I play several local LARPs here in the Bay Area, including Dystopia Rising, Dark Prospects, and I am the owner, one of many owners of Refuge San Francisco, a local LARP that is relatively new to the area. You might also know me from my time with Alliance San Francisco.
Awesome.
All right, and what is everyone drinking today? I'm going to start off with Kai.
I am being boring, but also just focusing on hydrating. So I've just got some water on me right now.
Anthea.
I am drinking Moscato in a stein because I am fancy like that.
Ooh, fancy, yes. I am drinking a mimosa in a Japanese teacup
Ooh.
because I have learned that mimosa is part of my branding now, so I have to be consistent.
Did that was that a rub-off effect from Tobias, or has that been something on its own?
Oh no, it's been a rub off from Tobias since we had our show last week, Time for Mimosas, and that turned out to be more popular than I would ever have guessed. So now we're gonna have another one on a future Thursday when we can't think of anything and just invite random guests to just hang out, drink, and do random fun things because that's what the internet wants, and I'm more than
Perfect.
okay with that.
Gotta give the people what they want.
Exactly. Give the people what they want. Shout outs. Does anybody have shout outs for anyone today? I'm going to start off with Kai.
Oh my goodness. I am it has been a little bit of time since we done our last episode, and I realized that I am entirely unprepared for this. So I don't believe I have a shout out at this point in time.
All right. And Thea, do you have anyone that you want to give a shout out to?
Yeah, I would like to give a shout out first and foremost to the Bay Area role playing board members, all 8 other of them, all of whom I couldn't do this crazy venture of Refuge without, as well as my extended LARP community that I play with and that I get to run games for. Without them, I wouldn't be doing this hobby because what's the fun of rules if you don't have people you care about?
Mm-hmm.
Nice. My shout out is going to be to Erica Fermina, who had a stream yesterday gathering several AAPI creators, so Asian American Pacific Islander creators, and raised money for a charity called Stop AAPI Hate. Raised $6,000. That was amazing. I got to play D&D in a very Asian themed game by Mackenzie Darmus. Was very excited to play. We actually all got emotional at the end because it was very on point in terms of Asian themes. But I also got to talk with Erica and Michael Kritz about what it is like to deal with being Asian in America and ways that we can look forward to figuring out how to go forward. So that discussion was amazing and fun and very honored. So shout out to Erica for raising that much money and also hooking up with me up with a lot of new friends now who are all Asian American Pacific Islander creators. So very happy about that.
That's awesome.
That's so cool.
Yes. Yeah. And so for today's topic, the topic we picked for today is LARP leadership. So interesting note, when Kai proposed this, Kai originally thought out of game LARP leadership. I thought in game LARP leadership, but it turns out that all three of us have both. So it's actually a good topic for this group to talk about. But I don't know where we would start.
I feel like we should get started on the out of character side of things, and then maybe moving into the in character stuff.
Okay.
Because I think I as always, like, this absolutely slides into my leadership philosophy. Like, you should always kind of lead with the out of character stuff, and then you can play with the in character stuff kind of safer.
Mhm.
By the way, I do actually realize I do have a shout out now, if I may.
All right, go for it.
Cool. So on Wednesdays, pretty consistently, there's a Twitch channel ran by a friend of mine called Maxwell. They have so their Twitch channel is called SeussMD, and there's about 10 of us who have been playing this PC game called Stellaris, but we have been playing it in a roleplay format. It is a 4X game, so it's a giant like space empire building game, but what we do is we play our empire leaders like actual roleplay characters. So we build up like a lore and backstory on how things are going. Usually our games run about 6 to 8 sessions, if not a little bit more. We've had some games go on for as long as like 3 months before. And yeah, just this is the biggest time that we've done a game, and it just wrapped this last game on one of the seasons, and we're going to be starting up another one soon. But we had like 10 different PC players like playing in a group doing this like role play session, and it was really, really cool. One of the other people in our group is another fellow streamer who I've played LARP with as well. They go under the moniker Wolf Song on Twitch. So both
Oh,
of them
yeah.
are very worth checking out.
Mhm. Yeah, I'll actually put some of their stuff on the chat right now. So if you want to check out Seuss MD, there you
Mm-hmm.
go. And I believe that's Wolfsong
1985.
1985. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
we'll go ahead and put that down. And also my friend Erica Fermina's Twitch, because of raising $6,000 for Asian charities, is freaking amazing. So she goes by A Style Pixie. Cool
Absolutely.
beans. Yes. All right. So, again, a topic like this. Oh, thank you, Kai. A
That's okay.
topic like this is very broad, and Kai, you said you wanted to start off with out of game, and
Yeah.
so, God, like, I'm trying again. Where do we start? Like,
Oh, go ahead. If you have an idea, that's totally cool, and we should lead with that. I have a potential
oh,
idea
I
as well,
don't.
but
I've been drinking mimosas, so
okay.
I leave that on you. That's on you.
You should continue to enjoy your mimosas in a
Thank you.
responsible and adult fashion. And
Yes.
Anthea,
Yeah.
I know that like you suggested this as a topic to start with. What do you feel are some of the most important things that we should like maybe start to lead with, perhaps?
I feel like one of the big things that I always think is important to talk about is what we sort of look for in the culture that we build in around our games. Because as game runners and even as personalities who are, people who are big personalities in a game, we
Mhm.
sort of help lead a culture. And I think that that's always something that's very important to talk about why and what we look for.
Mm. Now, when you say culture, are you meaning like what do you mean by that kind of regard? Like, could you maybe extrapolate like that particular area first, maybe?
Yeah, so when I talk about culture, I'm usually talking about the sort of atmosphere of a game, the way we all interact, right? I find it's very important to lead a game where everyone feels like they can have some level of ownership over the game itself, and where everybody feels like they're being supported no matter what. If they come forward with something, whether it's small or big, they're going to be heard, and their concerns are going to be addressed in some manner. And also just happy. I want people to be happy at games. Otherwise, why would they keep coming?
Mhm.
Absolutely. Ryan, I know that
Yeah.
you've ran a few different types of games before.
Mhm.
What are some of the games that you've run personally as a game runner?
So, oh, as a game runner.
Yeah.
So, speaking about LARPs, so one of the games that I did run with Bruce Monarch was a closed LARP called Hollywood Forever. So it was many of our friends who we just generally knew. Like the original reason why we ended up running this game was because it was a bunch of our friends, but was also it also turned out to be many of our streamer friends who wanted to LARP but had no introduction into that world. But they at least knew Bruce or they knew me. It's like, we know you LARP. If you're running that game, then we can come to that and experience it. I'm like, okay. So, like, for many streamers, Hollywood Forever was their introduction to a lot of that world. And then they became comfortable. It's like, oh, okay, where's other LARPs? So from that point, they were able to go to play other LARPs. So it's kind of, so I feel very honored that we were a lot of people's entry points, especially for streamers who just didn't know, but were honestly curious. But that barrier of entry of like I don't know anyone is still a barrier of entry because LARP is a very social game, and yet a lot of our induction is usually through our friends or I know at least someone. But LARP has become a more popular thing in the last few years where the barrier entry is much lowered until we hit the pandemic where now we're waiting for safety or vaccinations, and the size will determine, as well as the culture, as Anthea pointed out, will determine when it is safe to play again. Because, like, to be frank, if I were playing in a 30, 40 person LARP, I if I was once I was vaccinated, I'd be okay with that. But like 200 is like, ooh, okay, that's a little much. But if it's later down the year, once we know that certain things, once we see certain stats go down, again, I'd be okay. But again, a lot of that is dependent on culture and the community. And even though there are many people that really, really want to play again in the physical space because we are touch starved and we really, really miss our friends and we miss the interaction and energy. Um, the culture will determine again how much we respect that safety, and that all comes back to LARP leadership.
I would definitely quite agree with that, and not even quite agree with that. There's no ifs, ands, and buts. I very much agree with that. Anthea, what are your feelings on that?
I feel like a lot of that also comes down to trust, which is a huge, huge thing for LARP leadership. Like we
Mm.
have to build the trust for our players to know that, we do have their best interests in mind, that we do care about their safety and the safety of our staff, right? That's also super important. But we also have to trust our players to be responsible and to tell us when they're comfortable and let us know sort of what they're looking for honestly and openly, which can be very hard to build for people. I know my group in particular is sort of maybe potentially maybe starting the conversation about when we can start live events and what
Mm.
that may or may not look like. And I've already had my staff members start coming to me with what they want to see before we go live, what they need out of us. And that's something that I'm really, really grateful for because I don't want my staff members to ever feel like they can't come to me with
Mhm.
their requests or their concerns. And I'm hoping that once we start having those conversations, my players will also come to me with what they're comfortable with and what they think we need to do as an organization to make sure that they're safe.
That's super smart. And I very, very much respect and appreciate the transparency and kind of you mentioned earlier the kind of like feeling of group ownership. I love the idea of players feeling connected to the story and feeling like they've been able to change enough of the story that they have made their mark in it. And that's like a wonderful buy-in on an in-character way, and that can very much lead to out-of-character attachment. But your idea with this is a very different approach. that has another kind of layer to it. And I feel like I might be misspeaking here, but I feel like more modern LARPs, like younger games and things like that, are more prone to kind of try and take that level of everyone has a voice, everyone should be heard kind of attitude. I feel like in older LARPs, not always, but in older LARPs, sometimes that is very, it's not something that's appreciated. It's almost draconian in a way. Um, uh, do you, do you feel that way, Ryan, or what do you think about that?
So I think what we are looking is an evolution of LARP culture from, say, 20 years ago when I first started. When you're looking at LARPs back then, you're looking at a group that's as comparable to, say, Dungeons and Dragons when it was a lot more stigmatized rather than the Dungeons and Dragons that we experience now. So you're
Mm,
talking about a lot of the nerd culture and gatekeeping that has resulted in a lot more um, very draconian, as you would put it, power structure. And there also wasn't that um, philosophy of making people safe as it was, hey, we have a game to play. I'm willing to put up with anything in order to play in this game. And um, and so part of it really was a lot of these people that were trying so hard to protect the world that they have, and they want to bring other people in, but not everybody uh, has the I guess has the organizer skill to be able to have those ears and listen to everybody. But at the same time, we also have to credit them that they actually still ran them. But over time, we have learned to appreciate a more a more inclusive culture because we now have tools, we now have people, we now have things that have studied like these areas. We now have these tools that allow us to have more open discussion. It just didn't exist back then. And it's not that there were not games that didn't have them, but back then you were only looking at, I'm responsible for just running this game, and that is all we were looking at. We were not looking at, we are just responsible for running the game and managing a community. That has definitely changed within the last 5 7 years.
yeah.
So that type of evolution is still new to a lot of people. To like certain people, like we think, oh, it's a given. It's not a given in a lot of places, and it's still and like cues for those safety whenever they are there are appreciated because it usually does go above and beyond what a normal game master generally deals with. When you're running a D&D game, you only have to manage the care of the player group there. When you're doing a LARP, there's a lot more social complication that comes as a result. So anyone coming into LARP leadership now um, knows that it's not just a game they're running anymore. It's now a game and the social community. And not everyone is able to do that on their own, which is why you need a group.
Yeah.
I feel like if I may make an observation here, I feel like um, as LARP has been continuing in America, because LARP in America is significantly smaller than in Europe, um, but I feel that it's a newer generation of players, and some people might not agree with this observation. This is purely speculation on my part, but I think that Gen Z in general has had a massive effect on that paradigm shift into a more compassionate and, shall we say, self-aware form of playstyle, maybe.
Hmm.
I absolutely agree. It's something that I've noted with your game in particular, Kai. Um, your game drew a lot of newer, younger LARPers, and there is a very strong culture of ensuring that everyone around you is taken care of. And asking and talking and open communication, which I've seen more from the younger group that has sort of pulled the rest of us along with it. And I think that that's something that's very important. I think one of the other things that I've noticed is when you were talking about sort of older games, a lot of them started at the time where there was one LARP, right? You only
Yeah.
had your own one LARP in your area. And a lot of people felt like that was their only social circle. So to speak out against it might lead to them feeling ostracized or isolated in their own social circle. And it led to a lot of sort of hiding issues and not speaking out about them. Whereas now the social circle is a lot more broad, there's a lot more people, and we're also listening more. We're more open to talking about things. It's one of the things that makes me very, very happy to see sort of all LARPs are moving in that direction. And I'm very happy about it, even if it's a little bit hard to do for some people because it's, old habits, and old habits always die hard. But yeah, that's something that I was sort of noting earlier when you were talking about the older games. We saw something a little similar to that with Alliance, back when I was still running content and playing games for them. And so we saw this sort of like old habits that were slowly, called out to be bad habits,
Yeah.
and slowly changed and moved forward. And so I think you're right. I think your assessment that Gen Z has had a lot to do with that is completely accurate. I love all my Gen Z friends. They're amazing. And I'm so glad that I get to play with them and that I get to have them in my LARP.
In a lot of the friend circles that I used to be in before I came, I got back into LARPing, I usually felt like I was the younger end of my social circles, like I was the younger one. And as I got back into LARPing and I started making more friends with the players that I was playing around, I started to have more Gen Z friends. And I like being the older kid in that group rather than the younger kid was a really different shift for me. But I definitely found a group of people that I enjoyed the company of I don't want to say more. I just felt that I connected with them on a different level. Like the emphasis on the empathy and compassion kind of root of having those social interactions and environments was just incredibly good. It was a very positive experience for me, and it led me to learn a lot about kind of some of the things that are going on. I felt like I wasn't really quite as in touch with some of the bigger social issues of the world at the time until I was able to meet someone who was experiencing them, and because they were part of this good, healthy circle of friends that were actually communicating and talking. When they were expressing themselves, I was able to be in a situation where I could listen, and I learned, and I loved that. So I'm super grateful for that.
Yeah.
So I am gonna come at this from the opposite end, where I believe that while Gen Z ended up coming into LARP and changing the discussion, I don't think it originated with Gen Z. Um, Now, keep in mind, I'm Gen X, so I am much older in a different generation, and therefore it's gonna have a perspective and a twist. So for me, being Gen X, being in those early LARPs, now I was in the LARPs in California. So being in California, which is fairly diverse in a lot of the cities, luckily I wasn't the only person of color playing those LARPs, but there still weren't that many, and sometimes I was usually the only gay one in those LARPs. And yet, doing that, because I was among, that group, it enabled me to do things within fantasy that I wouldn't get to do within other social groups. Because LARPs at that time were still stigmatized, like only those
Mm,
outcasts, did LARP. So you ended up with a lot of people who didn't belong, who ended up having to work together to play a game. And the interesting part was the number of people that in and it's going to sound weird, who I was, playing in those games, who are on who are on the very right side of politics, because there were many people who were military, and there were many people who have that background, and ended up being like some of my fiercest defenders, like even to today, um, in regards to being gay and all of those things. And LARP was this really strange place where people had this common interest of geekery that, regardless of your politics, you could still be friends. This is not something that is as true now,
mm.
in games, that I have noticed. But again, I am Gen X and I see that perspective. There does come with it, even though there is that openness, there is also a level of, if you do not embrace that openness, you are like, you do not belong here, which
Mm.
sometimes is good and necessary, and other times it calls people out before there's even a legitimate issue to worry about. And that is what worries me, when it comes to these things, in terms of being able to service everyone. But if you have the communication that is open, with people, you can also at least express the type of game that you're intending, and you will get those people because you're able to express that. So it's more than just, this is a vampire game. It's not just, this is a post-apocalyptic game. You are now saying, this is the post-apocalyptic game that are dealing with these issues, and as you are saying that, you are now clarifying to the audience you are now, wanting in your group. And that has actually been wonderful, because now people aren't coming to game without, um, expectations that were not realistic, because they now see those communications, uh, um, up front when it comes to playing those games.
That's I mean, you've just said a lot, and I think a hell of a lot of it has just some incredible weight. And I'm trying to soak it in right now, because like
Yeah.
there's so many points there that I really enjoy, and even on things where we don't see eye to eye, like I think you have very, very valid justifications for what you just said. Like it makes a hell of a lot of sense.
Mhm.
And I don't think Gen Z has a lockdown on being the first to introduce compassion and things like that.
Mhm. I would
Um,
say it's the weirdos that were part of
mhm,
X and Y that said, "Oh, we realized this LARP can be a safe space," and opened it up that way and tried to find the language and go, "Hey, this is what we think we can do. It's not perfect, but we think we can do this." And over time, that brought in other people that were considered outsiders. I think because LARP is one of the reasons why I know so many people who are trans, and it is so wonderful to know that. If I hadn't had LARP in my life, I wouldn't have as many beautiful trans people in my life that I could role play with and put on stream.
same.
Because many of the people who are role playing get to be their true selves. Sometimes who we're role playing is more true to ourselves than who we are when we're at work.
Some of my friends have discovered themselves, like their actual real identity that they feel is really encapsulated within themselves, um, by LARPing and playing and experimenting in this safe space, and then discovering, you know what, I feel better when I am actually being this other version of myself that I didn't fully realize I was able to be. Like giving that agency for anyone, I think, is incredible. And the idea that our generations are working together, like building a set of bricks that the next generation is building on top of it, and
Mhm.
at the end of it, we're having this just like beautiful, like building a tower just kind of going upwards that has all of these extra facets to how LARP is kind of evolving and changing, which I really enjoy. Um, Anthea,
Yes.
if you don't mind my asking, do you have anything around there that you would like to kind of add before I circle back to a couple of the things that you stated right at the start?
Um, Not particularly. You guys sort of seem to cover a lot of it. I kind of have a little bit of a slightly different view, but I interact with LARP in a very different space than either of you guys do,
Hmm.
because being a woman in LARP and being a woman in leadership in LARP is always going to be a very, very different experience.
Oh
Um,
yes.
and so it's it's empowering and it's wonderful and it's great and it's also extremely difficult at times. And so for me, there are things that I see that I'm like similar, but also there are still uphill battles that have been
More
fought
room to
and are,
grow.
yeah, more room to grow.
Hmm.
And it's one of those things that makes me happy that, these conversations do happen, that we do have people who want that growth, and who really want to drive it. I also did notice a question in the chat
Yes.
directed at me.
If you would like, you can definitely hit that. Usually we leave the questions till later
Cool.
in the episode. But
Awesome.
if you feel that it is super relevant to right now, you can answer that. Or if you want, depending on your comfort level, I know I would love to hear some more of your experiences as a woman who is running a LARP and
Yeah.
managing that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, and
Um,
because the other things that I wanted to circle back on, those can this is all very fluid. It can wait if you feel like you would rather talk about that
Wherever you
part.
guys want to go, I'm here for the ride. I did not bring the keys because I'm drinking Moscato, so
Fair enough. Okay,
someone else
well,
is driving.
to make that clear in chat, and if someone would like to repost what I'm saying here, if you would like to ask a question in chat, please, all caps, the word question, nice and big and large, at the start of your question so we can catch it. And when we get to near the end of the show, we're going to try and go through the questions and answer as many of them as possible. So if you would like to ask a question, please, by all means, ask away. So I'm personally super fascinated about some of your experiences as a female a female presenting a feminine LARP runner. Um, shall we talk about that, or shall we go back to kind of the cultural effect that we as leaders have with our players, like the issues of trust and things like that? What would you rather kind of dive into first?
I'm honestly here for whichever one. I love both of those topics, obviously. Um,
Then let's have you answer like being a woman in
yeah,
leadership.
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, I can definitely go into that.
Mhm.
I've touched on it before. Being a woman in leadership is there's not many of us around. Um, to be quite honest, I have known, I think, a total of 3 or 4 other women who have owned LARPs, personally, that I have met. I know that there are obviously going to be more out there, but compared to the 20 or 30 male game runners that I have met throughout my time LARPing. And so there's always a sort of difference in interacting with the space, and with the community and with each other on a peer to peer level that, a lot of people don't realize. And I think it also, in a way, intimidates some women away from doing that, because it is hard. So that's sort of the elevator blurb on that.
That makes a lot of sense. It doesn't seem. I mean, not to be presumptuous, but it does not sound easy just with some of what you've gone over loosely there,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, it is always an uphill battle, and I personally find it a worthwhile battle to fight constantly, every day, nonstop, because I want to make it easier for other people like me and not like me, but who might also be marginalized, to step into these sort of leadership roles. And it's hard to do if you don't see somebody there doing it. That's sort of one of my biggest goals on a national level with Refuge, is to really encourage sort of active diversity hunting, active making sure that we're seeking out people who are not our standard to fill roles. And we're starting to do that really well. We just got a new chairperson who is also femme. And I'm very, very excited about that. That is one of our top leadership roles in the organization. And to have that is a really good sign.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. She's really great. I'm very excited. But that's sort of something that I've been really actively driving. Um, and I think one of the things that needs to be openly discussed a lot more is sort of how we communicate to each other, and sort of the inherent biases that we all have because we've all grown up in this society. So we're
Mm.
all having to unlearn and relearn how we talk to each other, how we communicate, and what we expect from each other.
I would like to ask Anthea like the question from Pagsy the Crabsy. How
Yeah.
long have you been involved in LARP leadership, and what made you want to become part of it? Since I feel like that flows into what you just discussed.
Yeah. So I guess like my pedigree here, like to start like full on and then get into it. I've been gaming for about 20 years. I started gaming when I was 12. My first D&D game, my father took me when I was 12. It was great. I loved it. You can see my cat's tail is everyone say hi to my cat. I love
Hello,
him very
cat.
much. And he is going off my desk.
Meow.
um, so I started gaming when I was 12. I started D&D then. I started LARPing when I was 20. So I've been LARPing for about 12 years. In that time, I played a variety of LARPs. And about 6 or 7 years ago, I started playing Alliance San Francisco. I went to my first game, I NPC'd, I had a blast, and then I decided I was going to be a plot writer pretty much immediately after that. And so I dove straight into plot writing. And from there, it was just sort of rolling uphill. I became a senior writer for them, which is one of the positions I hold. And then I became general manager for Alliance for about 18 months. During that time, the owner of our LARP had some personal issues, so I stepped in as sort of de facto owner and communicated on a national level with Alliance National. And then recently we started Refuge, which is a board of 9 of us, over half of which is femme or femme presenting. And since then, I've been doing that. I really got into that partially because I'm one of those people where I'm like, if I see things needing to get done, like I just want to step in and do it. It's just one of those things that I do, but partially because it was always really fascinating for me. I really care about the community. I really care about the people I play with, and I really care about the games. And so I really want to see them succeed. And I want to do my best to help ensure that those communities grow and that our hobby grows, because as our hobby grows, we get new people and new blood and fresh ideas, and we all grow and we all do better. And so that's sort of why I got into LARP leadership.
I love that.
I have a question for the group. Since we often talk about LARP leadership usually being a group that steers the direction of a community as well as a game system, what do you look for in people when you want to draft them into your leadership?
I can absolutely start. So,
Mhm.
when I was general manager of Alliance San Francisco, um, my assistant general manager, Erin, who, if you've ever played Alliance, you know her. If you've ever played Refuge, you probably know her. I basically drafted her in because I turned around at an event where I was feeling very overwhelmed. And I was like, I need you to do these things, actually, at the direction of one of our chat members right now, Emily. She told me to do this. And so I did. And Erin just did it, took everything, smoothed things out, made things wonderful. And I was like, perfect. I need you for forever.
I
Oh,
love it
that's
when
so.
you find someone so indispensable like that. Sorry, Ryan, I didn't mean to cut you off
Yeah.
there.
No, I was just gonna react. That is so cool and
Yeah.
cute. Like, oh.
Yeah. Erin kept me sane. Erin is like one of my biggest support people. I always adore having her. But part of what I look for is someone who cares, someone who's competent. But competency also comes often from a sense of caring and ownership. That feeling of, I want this to succeed because I feel some level of responsibility or ownership in this game. And that level of caring for your community, caring for the people around you. And so that sort of are things that I look for. I look for people who care, people who want it to be better, people who drive. Whether it's social interactions with other players, whether it's volunteering and helping just step in no matter what, anything along those lines. Those are the sort of people that I think are best suited for leadership, even if they don't themselves necessarily realize that that's what they're doing.
I would agree with that.
Mm.
I often keep an eye out for people who have the passion, the passion and the energy to be involved, the clear head to kind of either preempt things or handle themselves when things are a little hectic. You don't have to be super cool or like, have a super lizard brain or something like that. But being able to not be part of the panic is absolutely a skill that I think is very important. And not having an ego about things is also really essential.
Absolutely.
I actually think back when you were talking about how I think you said one of the first sort of like, I don't know, I'm struggling with the right word for it, but on the creation of a game versus on the outside experiencing the game, being part of the content. You said you were a writer first. Did I hear that
Yeah.
right?
Yes, I was a content writer for Alliance first and foremost. I stepped in doing that, which I I mean I love to see my friends cry, as long as they're not necessarily happy
Consensually.
tears, but they're having fun.
Yeah.
And so I really enjoy writing really meaningful plot for people. And that was sort of one of those things that I had no idea I enjoyed doing until I did it one event and I was like, well, why would I ever stop?
If I may ask, were you one of the first like femme presenting writers in that Alliance chapter?
I wasn't one of the first, but I
Mm-hmm.
was one of few. So at the time I stepped onto the team, there was one other femme presenting writer for that staff, Mariko, who is an excellent writer and a delight and a treasure. So there was one other person there, and then I believe there was
So
two other femme people on the other campaign.
that is super awesome. I'm very glad to hear that. I will say we are starting to run out of time. So I'm going to keep some of my questions pretty centralized on you directly on that. I've personally noticed something, and I'm wondering if like this was a factor or not. When I've been running a game and we've had our variety of writers creating content, I have absolutely seen a difference between different writers. and obviously the experiences of a writer kind of shape things. And that goes from every facet and angle. Like if you are a white guy, you are going to write probably more than likely into this kind of sort of loose area. And if someone is not in that white guy box of creativity, I feel like it is more noticeable when people, not always, but like, I guess an example is there's been some like really revolutionary movies that have come out over the last like 10 years, and quite a few of those have like broken a lot of the norms, and a lot of them are because they are writers that aren't white males, and that has brought an incredibly different viewpoint in all of it, because the white male viewer like vision, like the perception that we see from is not the same as anyone else's, and having so many of these different viewpoints is really helpful for creating a space. Do you feel that your writing, and this is what I was leading up to, how much do you feel that your writing was able to create spaces for more femme presenting gamers to feel like they were actually being involved in your game, do you think?
Honestly, I hope a lot. I do think it did help. One of the things that I think about a lot as a writer is how people can engage with content, because it is hard to engage in content if the person who's writing it doesn't know how to engage you. And so, kind of to your point about sort of cultural things, Birds of Prey is like one of my favorite movies. I watch that all the time. And part of why I enjoy that, like, it is my favorite comic book movie ever. And part of why I enjoy that is because it is easy for me to engage with. Having that perspective of, the movie isn't done with a certain type of gaze, with a male gaze, it is done with the gaze of a female, makes it easier for me to engage in that movie and find joy and see myself in it. And so when I'm writing content, I do try to write it easier for people to see themselves being able to engage in it, being able to hear it. Um, so that's definitely one of my biggest concerns and one of my hopes. I really, really hope that it's easy. I have to ask some of my more femme presenting players how they feel about it, but that is absolutely my hope.
Awesome, thank you, Ryan. Do you have an opinion on that particular topic? Because I know you are a writer and content creator yourself as well.
I had no idea.
So, so this is a very, so my opinion is a little bit more pointed only because of what I have seen in development. And so, and when I say development, as in like, I used to work for a few years in development, as in like the creation of movies, like going through scripts, trying to see like what can be approved and stuff. And I think when it comes to people writing other cultures, um, for the most part, like many people do it, not with the intent of ever slighting other people. They will generally just run into it by accident without because they didn't just manage to consult someone of that culture who can say, okay, this is weird, laws of the East, because we are not, as Asia is not a single culture, and you cannot take a Thai term and a Korean term and a Chinese term and put it into a religion and this sprouts the vampire. Even though I'm guilty of liking playing Quajin. But aside from that, it's like, oh, okay, so here's the funny part about this. Laws of the East, when it came out, because I was Asian, I was so happy to play an Asian vampire, and yet it's still the Filipinos that were kind of like still put to the side, because even somehow they somehow ranked Asian appropriateness, because it was the only option I had. And so for me, it was not. I didn't look at it as a slight. Yes, we could look at it like 15 years later. And it's like, well, they should have done this. Look at America's Next Top Model, but um, but it was the only representation that existed, and
Mm.
it inspired me to get into those parts and think that we can be better. So the thing is, we can't. So I'm very wary of people going, this person was racist, supremacist, all of these things 15 years ago. They just didn't know what they were doing, but they still inspired people to get into the role playing area and go, okay, now that you've done your turn, let's rewrite this, or let's readdress it, or let's revision this into something that feels more authentic.
Yeah.
So it's very important for us to not just automatically just kind of like throw everything into the trash, because if it wasn't for some of these things, we wouldn't know that those things need to be fixed, because otherwise those cultures would never have been thought of at all.
It's like
Because
that. Sorry, go ahead.
too many because we come across the D&D problem. Like when I say the D&D problem, I talk about the idea of races being inherently evil, and because they represent the other. The thing is, other people of color, people who are queer, have now been involved with D&D for some time. They're now recognizing it. They're now trying to find the language, with other things and supplements within the past couple of years. Vampire has done a really great job with what they have done. They're trying, but it's so important for people to allow them to try, rather than to just constantly like grate on them that this is, and put in the judgment value if they are trying to actively work on it, because back then they didn't have that language, they didn't have those people who were involved. But if it wasn't for that stuff, we wouldn't be involved. So
Yeah, so many of these terms that we use now were not available 10 or 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And yeah, like terms, and when I say terms, I mean tools as well. Like there's a lot to that. And I actually even mentioned like kind of the idea of that generations of like bricks, and then the next generation adds another layer of bricks earlier in this episode. I think that is very valid. Like throwing out stuff isn't always the best. You don't want to forget something ever happened. You want to learn from it. Is that am I right what you're saying there?
Yes, you want to learn from that. The other thing that we have brought in from older generations, and I'm talking about older generations like before my time, several generations before, is that cultures are not monolithic. Or like we think about like Tatooine as the entire planet is desert. We think about these places that don't have the complexity that we have in on Earth. Cultures are a lot more varied. Africa is not one culture. I have to explain that to people. And if you did your research, West Ghana is different from Zimbabwe, is different from Egypt, is different from Kenya, is different from Morocco. Those are totally different places.
Yeah.
Just because they have the same skin color doesn't mean it's one culture. Because they would be pissed.
I mean, a very easy example of this is compare places in America, like California and Texas. Those are
Those
very
are not
different
the same
cultures.
place.
No. Yeah.
We say that and people get it. But you say that about an entire continent and they don't. But that's because we're so much more familiar with that. And part of it's familiarity. Yes.
Well, I mean, for Americans, traveling outside of the Americas is difficult. It's very expensive, and there are systemic problems with wealth that make that type of thing a little tricky.
Yep.
Someone said a comment that I really enjoy. Maris Silver Rose, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, or Mari Silver Rose. There we go. Hopefully, yeah. Thank you for this comment. The evolution from survival representation to authentic representation is super important to acknowledge.
This needs to be on a plaque somewhere, because that is so well written and so well said.
It is rather succinct, isn't it?
It's so good.
Okay, so we are fast running out of time, and there's definitely a couple of topics that I'd really like to hit on briefly. Sorry, Ryan, did you have something further?
Oh no, I was gonna look at the questions and answer those, so I'm good.
Okay, cool. We're going to get to the questions shortly. There's a couple of things that I think are really important for people understanding leadership. And I realized we didn't really get to talk much about out of character leadership. Sorry, in character leadership.
Yeah, not at all.
Because honestly, the out of character leadership, like running the events, is such a huge full-time kind of job and experience. I stopped being a leader in character of a faction in the game that I played once I started running events of that game because I didn't have time.
Yeah.
However, if you're able to have the time, that's wonderful. Okay, so the things that I wanted to touch on, Anthea, you mentioned trust.
Yeah.
And a little before that, you talked about how the leadership kind of shapes the culture. Yeah?
Yes. Yes.
Which of those two would you like to tackle on first, real quick?
Let's talk about sort of how the leadership shapes the culture, because I think that leads really directly into why trust and how, like, why trust is built and how to build it.
Now, something that Ryan and I have talked about on the show before in the past was that like you as leaders are going to shape the personality to a degree of the play style of your players. Is that some of the area that you were thinking?
Yeah, that's some of it. Some of it is sort of also what you encourage or what you allow in your game. So where you draw your boundaries and how strictly you enforce those. That's also sort of part of how you shape that culture in your game.
Yeah, we've had some incredibly passionate discussions just between you and I about the integrity of a leader running a game, and when you say something is important, you can't just say it. If someone starts messing with those things, well, I mean, please, I'm not trying to speak for you here.
One of the big things that I feel is like you have to back up your words with actions. So if you say, you know, we're not going to tolerate abuse or harassment in our game, and somebody comes to you with a complaint or a concern about someone else, and you don't step in and actually do something, you can say all the pretty words you want, but you're tolerating abuse and harassment in your game. And that's going to generate a certain type of culture that's going to let people know that they can do certain things, even if you're like, we don't want certain types of in character fighting, but you don't stop it, then that's going to happen. And so that sort of doesn't build trust, right? Your players don't trust you to actually back up your words when you're trying to make a culture, but you don't actually make it. I think that's something that's very, very important in a game. I know that's something, Kai, that you've actively done.
Yeah. I fight very, very heavily and I'm very transparent with my players. I talk about trust a lot, and I talk about how I aim to try and maintain it, because I feel like I've definitely seen some games suffer badly from the degradation of trust.
Absolutely. I think that's sort of one of the biggest problems with longer run games. Old chapters of a game sort of get into habits, or they build a certain reputation that can be hard to fight and hard to change. That's actually something I ran into with Alliance San Francisco. There was a certain type of reputation about our game, based on previous owners, based on owners who I never even met. And so it was always an uphill battle to try and be like, no, we've changed. Like, we've learned those lessons. We've learned them sometimes the hard way. And we're working on changing. We're working on being better. And it always felt like this uphill battle of trying to get that reputation changed. But it can be an uphill battle of trying to get people who are stuck in a holding pattern or in their bad habits to change. That's something that like it's an active process that you have to be wanting to do. No one else can make you do it. You've got to do it on your own.
Ryan?
Uh, like a few thoughts were going through my head, and I guess one of them is if you are in a LARP and you are wanting more people in leadership positions, but none of your player base is willing to do it, what happens then? Because that's a thing that completely happens in LARPs. They're having too much fun playing. The moment they transition to that side, they kind of go, nope, can't. And I respect that when they can't, because everyone has different levels of tolerances. But for someone who is running a LARP, what other options are there that most people are not aware of?
I have an idea on that, unless Anthea, you have one
Go
to.
for it.
I think something that Dystopia Rising does very well is the idea of shifts. People can sign up for more shifts, but if they want to help you run something, you give them a time slot of maybe about 4 hours of the game. And you see how they do, and you give them a chance with that. You shadow them, or they shadow you, and like you teach them how to do things. But when they go out on their own, like let them try things out a little bit. Don't just throw them in the deep end. I think it's very easy to terrify and scare off the people who will help you as volunteers, as staff, or however you, in your particular LARP, tend to define those areas. But giving people shifts of like, this is the amount of time that if you're offering to help, here is a reasonable amount of time. If you're able to give us more, we would love that. In no way are we pressuring you. And that kind of divide line of like, if you're just wanting to help, then here's the amount of help that is not going to burn you out, hopefully. And then allowing for that growth to go from there if that's something that someone wants to pursue more. It doesn't necessarily solve your manpower problems, but I feel like it prevents burnout at the very least.
One of the things that we sort of actively do is we do recruit a little more. So our setup is a little different from Dystopia Rising. Our plot members run all of the content that they write. So when I was writing my content, I was running that game. Which like I felt had a lot of benefits because then I knew like exactly how the mod went and exactly how things were going to follow up. And I could shift things on the fly, I could make things, hit different story beats if I needed them to. But one of the things we do is we often get people who want to come into a game and be new, and be very, very excited and become a writer or whatever they want to volunteer, and we'll pull them in because we have a blast in our monster camp. It's great times, but we sort of start them out low key, kind of like what you were saying. We start out with like, okay, like here's sort of basic NPCs you can start playing. Okay, here are a few more face characters that you can start playing with more world information. Okay, you really want in, go ahead, write me a couple of mods, we'll do a small arc. And just sort of building along that lines, and it really helps get people excited and stay excited.
Super good.
Yeah.
Ryan, before we start kind of going onto our question points and stuff like
Mhm.
that, is there anything else you wanted to add?
Not I would say on a practical level, if you don't find enough people, but you do need some level of management, shifts are good, as well as incentivizations for things like if you like even like extra experience points, extra boons or whatever, like those things are just easy to do, and you will find people who do it, and it's kind of like the kid that gets money for getting A's in a report card and then realizes over time, oh, getting A's is good because I can get into college. It's totally fine to have incentivization for a lot of these things, because you might find players that are like, okay, I'll do this as chef. It's like, oh, I actually like doing shifts. Oh, I can actually like doing logistics. Oh, I can tell this story. sometimes it's the candy in the way in.
I like the idea of incentives, but I feel that if you're a leader, you absolutely have to keep a careful nose for smelling when you have people that are only interested in the incentives and have no interest in actually the spirit of what you're doing. That's a careful temper point. I'm not saying that it's super common. I've only encountered it maybe once or twice. But when it happens, trust your instincts on those kinds of things, is my opinion. Um, yeah. So we're going to get to the questions in just a moment. We were talking about trust being super important, and you have to be willing to, I think the line, put your money where your mouth is, was used, maybe? I don't know.
I think it was in chat.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
That line definitely got dropped somewhere. In particular, when it comes to putting your money where your mouth is, if you're an event runner, that usually means you are somewhat financially tied to your game. And this is the number one thing that I think is scary for a LARP runner. And as a leader, I think is so important for you to know. There might be a time when one person or more than one person, because you're worried that if you ban someone, they will leave with a group of people and you will lose out on it. But there are sometimes going to be times where you have to choose between the promise of your words, your ethics, what you stand for, and the success of your game. And you will, or I feel like it's almost impossible not to have at least one of these situations popping up where you need to decide between, I really need these ticket sales, but this person is damaging my game. And you have to make that choice. I know what I would do. I know what all three of us would do. But I've absolutely seen it go both ways. And I have to say, it is a very hard decision when you are genuinely sure that doing the right thing and banning the bad apple will maybe kill your game. And that is a terrifying thing to do.
I think one of the things that I sort of always come back around to is not banning the bad apple will kill your game. It's
takes longer, but yeah.
Yeah. So it's sort of one of those things where it's like there's a might in the first scenario where it's like if I don't ban him, like if I do ban him, it might cause this to be harder. It might cause problems. It might cause me to be unable to do this. Whereas if I don't ban him, it will. Eventually, it absolutely will. And one of the things that I've learned is that my player base is always willing to help. And if I come to a point where I know that I need some more help in order to run games, or I need to pare back something, or I need to switch to only running small day games for a little while, my player base, if I am supporting them and I am doing the things that need to be done to keep them safe, will support me back and will have my back and help me out in whatever way that they can. And part of that trust, it comes down to that trust. And so part of that is banning that bad apple, because your players now know that you do care about them. You are there to protect them.
That they're not just a meal ticket.
They're not just a meal ticket. They are, in fact, people that you care about, because I think all game runners care about their people and their players and their community. Otherwise, nobody would be doing this if you didn't. It's not going to pay your rent.
Oh yeah, LARP is not, at least in America, LARP is not profitable.
No.
It is very difficult to walk away with like the amount of money that you would think a business owner could do. There are many costs that are hidden with those things. I realize that we've really got to get to these questions.
Yes, we do.
These questions are really
I'm
good.
gonna crack the whip on this one. We need to get
absolutely. With the quick outline of things, one of the most important reasons that you as an event runner need to keep your trust with your players is because if they do not trust you, the worst possible thing can happen, which is when someone genuinely needs you in one of those big oh shit moments. If they don't trust you, if they don't think you'll believe them, they will stay silent, and you will have something far worse lurking in your community, genuinely hurting people that people don't feel they can come to. Everything you do or not do in your game teaches your players what is permissible. Everything that you stop, your players will understand is bad. Everything that you lift up or you allow to happen, and sometimes not acting is allowing it to happen. Ignoring it and pretending it will go away is letting it happen, and people will think that that is permissible. You really have to be firm on that. You don't have to be unkind about the way you handle things, but you do have to hold yourself to what you say. Otherwise, the good players will leave. New players will learn to be bad only, and you will just have a toxic game. And it is tragic when that happens. We do have questions.
Yes.
Ryan, would you like to read some of the questions? Or
Yes.
cool.
I'll start off with Pagsy the Crabsy's question of for the group. For people who are interested in being a part of LARP leadership but don't know how to start, what advice would you give them? Mine is ask if they need help. Just literally ask them, and they'll probably either say yes, and we need help with these things, or thank you for asking. If I could think of something, I will let you know. But literally, just ask.
Yeah. Think of something that you like to do. Um, something that interests you. Is it costuming? Is it, helping check people in? Is it writing things? And then ask if you can help with that. Is it following your general manager around and making sure that they drink water because somebody's got to do it?
Oh boy.
Um,
Oh
oh
boy,
yeah.
yeah, that's truth.
Yeah.
Truth.
Ask if you can, or sometimes just be a little proactive. Don't be overly proactive, but a little proactive is helpful. um, so yeah, that is asking and sort of thinking about what you want to do will help a lot.
Oh,
um,
and also, sorry.
no,
Um,
that's fine. Go ahead.
if you're gonna be a proactive, please don't be a insert word here about it because you want extra points on your character sheet. No one likes that. That's annoying. I mean, yes, you would want to do that, yes, but don't pester them that you want to help for these things like constantly. Like it's just it reads as insincere, and I get that you love your character and things, but just don't do that.
Yeah, I mean, if you end up taking a position of power and immediately start kind of like asking and requesting for special perks for you and your friends, trust me, as event runners, we notice that. It's not a good look. We try to make sure everyone is having fun, everyone is feeling heard. Yeah, like that is kind of a big one. I have observed that more than often not, the people who are the most enthusiastic and aggressive with making sure that the event runners who are running them things, usually it's like between 3 and 5 people, the ones like really calling the shots and handling the certain areas. Those people are the ones that get followed around by the people that they know who are event runners from other games, and those people are not doing as much work usually, but they are doing one of the most important things, which is reminding you to take care of yourself, because more than likely in your friend's game that they run, you're probably doing the same thing to them, where you're bugging them and telling them to go fucking eat or sleep.
I've done
Sorry for
that to
language.
Kai. I've done
Yep.
that to Kai.
Yes.
Self-care monitors are an important part of LARP
Mhm.
leadership. They
Please self-care
really,
your
really
GMs.
are.
Yeah, your LARP runners care so much and remind you as players so often to look after yourselves. And we so often follow not we do not follow our own advice on that so
We're
often.
hypocritical.
Yeah, it's one of the few things that it's okay as a LARP runner to be hypocritical about, because you are trying to make sure everyone has a good time, and it's really nice when the other people on your team are helping you with that.
Yes.
In regards to the question that I realize we've deviated from,
Mhm.
I I get frustrated with the idea of like just ask, but it is really true. If there's something, if you think you have a good idea or you want to try and improve a facet of the game, then act. Speak up and offer your services. If you have an idea, make an idea, write it down, write down a plan and bring it to them. Don't tell them that this is what they must do, but offer it to them. Like, hey, I have some thoughts on how to improve things. Because the one of the many number one facts of LARP that I've observed is that as LARP is growing as a game, as a hobby, and people are becoming more aware of the things that we expect in terms of quality, there is a very unfair expectation of professional service in 100 different things that a LARP, honestly, doesn't charge enough to actually give you. It cannot have a dedicated therapist on site to handle every kind of emotional problem. It cannot
Oh
have
my God, yes.
a
Oh my
surgeon or a
God,
doctor
yes.
or things like that. There are so many facets that you expect, and honestly, so much of that is handled through volunteers and mindfulness and things like that. When you're running a conflict resolution group, like within the staff of the game, the number one thing you need to do is make sure that your players, when they come to you, feel heard. I cannot tell you the number of times that I've heard about people in other games like lodging a complaint, and the first thing they hear out of the words is either a defensive or an accusatory response from the person that they're reporting it to, and it's awful. And that is also a huge trust killer when it comes to your game. But yeah, like, step forward with a plan, and offer your help in an area that you think the game could be improved in. And trust me, like, we see that effort, and that is the effort that we really so desperately need, because we really do want to make our game better, your game better with us, you know.
Mhm. I do
Absolutely.
want to go to the. Oh, sorry, Anthony, did you
Absolutely.
have?
Oh, no, I was just agreed.
Hmm.
I did want to go to the other question. The other question is my only experience with LARP was long ago and very limited. I'm curious about how they are organized now. Do most LARPs have an overarching organization? How does that organization control the individual games? It's a good question for people who are not familiar with network games.
Yeah.
Um, so it depends on the setup, but usually the way it's either done in one of two ways. Uh, one is kind of, I almost want to say federal and confederacy, you know, not not in the U.S. terms, but some games basically have almost like a franchise system where all the games conform to a certain group or a certain like set of
We have
rules.
been told to hydrate, by the way. People are spending points, so
Oh,
drink some
Thank
water.
you. Where they they agree to run the game by a certain set of rules, and usually those networks allow depends, but they allow other players to play in other games in their network because they come into a common agreement of that is how those things are played. You also have like essentially what is a confederacy, meaning that every all those games may not run the exact same rules, but they are all under one banner, and that is how those games are run. Um, Usually, and please correct me if I am wrong in this manner, but usually for some of these games, in terms of control, it's not so much control as they are just trying to standardize a lot of this play so it enables players who are in those networks to play in other games rather than much overarching type of organization. However, that organization can also extend plots and other things that can happen with coordinators and such in order for an overall theme to run within the network. In more confederated type of games, they're not really looking to do overarching plot. They're just more like a hey, these games are cool and belong to this group, almost like a this is a clubhouse of approved games. And sometimes those games are not even the same system, but you might like if you like vampire with this group, you might like werewolf with this group, or you might uh, like a fantasy role playing in
Yeah.
this group. Yeah, so that's the
yeah.
only ones that really exist.
Yeah. A lot of it is varied by game to game. Refuge and Alliance both sort of have a similar setup where there's like all of our species exist. They're sort of generic um, traits that you can expect across the network, and they're sort of an overarching cosmology, but each individual game is going to be operating under the same rules, but each plot is going to be a little bit different. What happens in local chapters are going to be a little bit different. So there's not much control over what actually happens at the game. Mostly that we're sort of dictating like how we're going to operate within each other and sort of what ethos we're looking for on a national level.
Hmm. Yeah, and then I've seen other games that have been a lot more, like not aggressively so, but a lot more firm with their expectations of what a chapter must deliver and what type of genre that it must fit into and things like
Yeah.
that. So,
Mhm.
it is very much a case by case kind of basis.
Mhm.
Um,
I think that
yeah.
is the end of our questions.
We had a couple of small ones more. Eric Jackson was asking about uh, I'm not comfortable with the prospect of role playing. Are there other ways I could get involved? There are certainly some ways that you could get involved. The only real way to know is reaching out to a local LARP and offering that help.
Mhm.
I will say that I cannot guarantee how open arms that kind of approach might be, because if you're not actively playing in the hobby, it can be hard for a LARP to really kind of accept you into the community because it's an understanding thing. So it kind of varies. I don't know how welcoming or not an individual LARP might be to those sort of prospects, but you can always offer and be upfront and honest about it. But
I will
yeah.
say that there are often a lot of behind the scene things at a
Mhm.
game that could be
Yeah.
done that do not involve role playing. So even if
Mhm.
you're not comfortable role playing, you can still go to a game and help, like with Kai's game, perhaps with setting. For my game, I always need help setting up mod spaces, taking down mod spaces, lighting, sound, anything along those lines. On the back end, sometimes people will need help with websites, um, moderation, perhaps even logistic uh, work done on the back end. So maybe importing characters and making sure people are getting the rewards that they should be getting. So you can always reach out and just say, like, hey, I'm not really comfortable role playing, but is there any place for me to help? I want to still be a part of this.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of people will do that.
We have been told to hydrate.
Again,
Yes, but that is going to have to be the end point of our episode, as we are certainly running a good few minutes beyond our usual scope of episode.
oops.
Yes. The only reason why we have to cut it at a certain point is because Ryan has to do the audio editing,
Yes.
and it takes a long time to edit a podcast. So that's why I'm like, the longer it goes, like, oh,
I'm
there's so
so
much
Mhm.
more to
sorry.
edit. That's all. That's all it is. But the discussion has been good. I will answer at least
Yeah.
one other question: is how are you all doing? Holding up okay?
Doing pretty good. I've been excited all day to do this, so like I'm riding real high right now.
Uh,
Nice.
I've genuinely been kind of varying shades of not that great. I absolutely have had some times where I've basically not felt like I have had many goals and many directions. So thinking about the future has been uh, untenable. Maybe I don't know if that's entirely the right word. I'm sure someone will correct me on that. But yeah, things have been tricky with COVID, especially because I feel I was realizing how much of my life is kind of focused on like achieving goals, and when I'm staying home a lot, I'm not really out and traveling and doing those goals. But I am, now that things are opening up, starting to kind of identify why I was spiraling a bit, and being able to do episodes like Life Action Roleplay, for example, are those types of grounding things that are really delightful and wonderful. So, like, even just getting back into the saddle of a Life Action Roleplay episode has been a huge boost for me. And so, thank you for everyone being here.
Let's see, for me, well, so much of my life is now online because I now produce so much content uh online. The weird part is that, again, 4 years ago, Sin and I just decided, okay, let's just do a podcast.
It's wild that it's only 4 years. Oh,
Yeah,
only? Yeah, it is wild that it's 4 years.
that's 4 years ago. And then, as a result of lockdown, a combination of having our tech director Joe, who is a genius when it comes to OBS, who's behind the scenes right now, and
Mhm.
and myself just knowing how to produce a show, I just kind of went, okay, I'm just gonna run some things and see what happens. And it started as one thing, and then it went to another, and then my mind just constantly made things and kept making more of these things. And then companies and other communities and channels said, hey, we would love for you to be involved with these things, and we'll pay you for it. So I'm like, oh, okay, I will do those things. And now it's all kind of like I somehow within COVID ended up with a new career that I absolutely love. So I feel like I'm doing great, and I love to be able to, and I love finding talent and promoting that, and coming up with new games and promoting those, and finding people who are not traditionally in front of camera, like our POC and LGBTQ friends, and putting them on camera. And uh, yeah, I consider myself very, very lucky.
Hell yeah. You've been putting some amazing content out, so thank you for doing so.
Thank you. And with that, we are going to now wrap things up. Anthea, where can people find you on the internets?
Well, I don't have much by way of social media. You can find me on Facebook. I like friends, but you can find my game, Refuge San Francisco, on Facebook. You can find us at refugesf.org. And if you are not local to the Bay Area, don't worry, we've got chapters all over the country, everywhere from Kansas on west. So if you look up Refuge San Francisco, go ahead and take a look.
All right, Kai.
You can find me on Yokai Props on Instagram and Twitter. I am reasonably active on both of those. You can obviously find our podcast wherever you find podcasts. And you can find my LARP, which is Dystopia Rising NorCal. You can either type in Dystopia Rising Northern California in your Facebook search bar, and that will find some wonderful results of the groups and communities that are part of that. Alternatively, you can check out our website, which is rather peculiarly enough, the website address is Dystopia Rising NoCal, so that's NOCAL.com. It's a funny story behind that, but I won't go into it right now. And yeah, so that's the website. And then if you're curious about some Stellaris strategy times, by all means, check out Seuss MD on Twitch channels on Wednesdays sometimes. Yeah.
All right. My name is Ryan Omega. You can find me on Twitter under Ryan OMGA. I just started a TikTok because I hate myself. And you can find that under Life Action Role Play. Things that are coming up. I am running a D&D game on Gilding Light called Poison Tulips. It is a cross between Bridgerton and I feel like it would be Les Miserables. And it's basically about four bards who write tabloids but are also under an oppressed aristocracy, and they have to uh, scandalize nobles in order to gain any kind of equality because they are the last free press in all of the duchy. My players for that game are PJ McGaw, Izzy Spring, Sam Sterling, and Tobias McCurry. So that is starting this Saturday at 1 p.m. On Mondays at 10 a.m. I am the host and producer of Iron Game Designer, which is at Indiecade, twitch.tv/Indiecade, and my guest will be Nat Mesnard, one of the game designers for business wizards, and also creates games with queer spaces in them. So I'm really excited to have them on the platform like Indicate. So that's happening on Monday. And next Tuesday here on twitch.tv/liveactionroleplay, we have Boardroom Angels. So the Angels are having to deal with apocalypse happening within a month because they decided not the end of the year, they want to attack Hell next month. And we'll see the ramifications of that. That's Tuesday at 8 p.m. And normally on Wednesday we would have Point and Clink. However, that's the day I am getting my first COVID vaccine shot. So because I don't know how I'll react since I had COVID before, we're gonna take the rest of that week off so I can recover. I want to thank Joe for being behind the scenes. I want to thank Patreon for constantly supporting what we do. If you want to see some of the behind the scenes that we have, go and check out our Patreon. Otherwise, if you are watching, if you are subscribing, if you are following, you are supporting where you can, and thank you so much. We would not exist without you. And we are going to have credits roll to thank all of our Patreon people. But we are also going to rate our friend, the Nobo Show, because she's an amazing player and I love role playing with her. And she's playing Valheim. So we're going to say hi to her because she's amazing and she is a LARPer herself. With that, I think we're ready to raid.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're gonna start the credits and we're gonna say bye and thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.